arts and design in particular, the effectiveness of just transition relies to an extent on us understanding what that means and what those consequences are for our school. In one of our interviews, Araceli Camargo observes that there is a mythos around climate experts. Only a few people claim to know what's going on. And the reality that I think many of us know is that the climate emergency actually is showing up very differently in our communities and in our lived experiences. Sunlight doesn't need to pipeline works with others to explore what it means and what it will take to transition in a way that is just and ways that are nurturing a regenerative and reparative world, starting with the creative arts sector and design sectors going beyond. We need to look at ourselves first and our field first. Sunlight works to develop beyond stories with others, to create space for conversation, debate and reflection on what terms like transition, carbon, decarbonisation and sustainability mean in reality, particularly as these realities continue to intersect with injustice. At the center be aware of them and their guests. If someone needs something picking up as their hands are wet, please be aware of them and give them a hand. And also please do talk to Tay in between the drawings so you can get to know a little bit more about the project. We have 4 beautiful films playing next door. Please spend a little bit of time with them. And I want to thank Erica for the lovely soup and bread for earlier, and also say the Royal Club and David Kay, who's been doing really important food security work in Kingston for a long time, basically. Thank you so much, and please take, please drink it, right? It's important. Okay, so the first section of the day is called Remembering Relations Not Accounted For. Chanelle is a researcher, essayist, and artist, currently based in Switzerland. Her doctoral research in geography approaches questions at the nexus of land, history, and plant medicine in Madagascar and beyond. A Fulbright scholar, Chanelle holds an MA from, this is where I come from, École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, and a BA from Brown University from the USA. She leads site-specific ghost tours in international gardens, parks, and museums of natural history. As I said, it's a pre-recorded talk because Chanelle is currently in Madagascar on a research trip, but she's going to join us for a live Q&A.
Yeah, just squeeze in wherever you can.
Hey. Thank you so much for being here today in this disembodied format. I like to think it's actually quite suitable given the themes on and institutional presence that we'll be talking about today. So today I'll be reading from my essay, The Right to Rest in Peace, which really came out of an initial conversation that I had earlier in the decarbonization plan with Lisa. And this text is the result of the themes that came up in that conversation. Between providence and restitution is the interim. This time, between origins and return, is not dormant. Cycles of life and death still occur in this intervening time. But this natural cycle is interrupted by the museum, where death is often accelerated and life often fabricated. The result is a removed gaze, distant enough for relations between the audience and the art or artifact to be overdetermined through explanatory panels, thematic priming, and other museum technologies. A life-affirming institution would actively recognize death. Instead of grappling with this uncomfortable reality, the collections and reserves of many museums are functional as holding cells that sustain this interim, not really affirming life, not quite addressing death either. And this is made possible through a foundational logic of description. Description is not an open inquiry, and it's a system that cannot bear Black and Indigenous life, to quote Kathleen Kitcher. This approach to description disciplines knowledge systems by reinforcing and recycling narratives from existing structures. In this space, curiosity and questioning aren't alive, and neither are the specimens. In order for empires to perpetuate ecocide and threaten our own survival as a species, they recruited a few foundational myths. By imagining the world as already dead or on the cusp of inevitable extinction, it became easier to obscure reality enough to avoid taking responsibility for impact. The collection of these empires rushed to preserve life, which was not at threat of extinction before their arrival. The museum, a direct descendant of this logic, is the conclusion shaped by this scaffolding. As a result, exhibitions of people, plants, animals, and art are authored of premature death, and aliveness is puppeted by the institution to prop up the illusion of liveness. But this colonial fantasy is no longer tenable. Historically, museums have operated as selective time machines, often serving nationalist narratives. The ebbs and flows of cyclical change and decay are hidden, which creates a peculiar timelessness. In Europe and North America in particular, looted, pillaged, and coercive collections have been agitated by centuries of preservation technologies, just to uphold this illusion. Assumed by Western and global North cosmologies to be inert relics, many museum collections presently and in the past have been warped with the use of formaldehyde, solvents, resins, fungicides, surfactants, to produce a sense of relevant liveliness. And in that process, the life cycles of the captive specimens and the emergent ecosystems are disturbed. Many species thrive in this disturbance, such as bugs and fungus, which swarm the collections during opportune moments, inciting the use of further technologies of preservation. Because fundamentally, conservation and preservation is a mediated relationship between life and death, I want to ask who and what is prevented from dying when these technologies are employed? What would it mean for museums to honor decay and this right to rest in peace? By formal recognition of death, might that open up a space to honor grief, which has been blocked by museums and practices of preservation for almost 3 centuries now? Like mushrooms, ghosts also thrive on disturbance. Fungus and specters both operate on network knowledge, much like the interconnectedness of history. Just days before slavery was officially abolished in Saint Domingue, now Haiti, the Louvre Museum opened its door to the French public. But this had limited impact for the 500,000 formerly enslaved people referred to as Maroons, until the victory of the Haitian Revolution 13 years later. Political theorist and activist Françoise Roger draws this connection between the museum and ghosts of slavery, while going, quote, in search of the ghost of slavery in one of the largest museums, end quote. Vergès reminds us that even if the enslaved in slavery are not directly represented in a museum, that, quote, hiding behind the walls, a maroon is running through the museum, end quote. Museum ghosts are a residual symptom along this continuum of historical unrest. Attempts by the museum to manage manage this haunt recruit the same foundational technologies. Through myths, narratives, and conservation, the museum can falsify life and neglect its own politics around death. But if restless ghosts are manifestations of ruptured modes of relating, serving as reminders to museums of all that is unresolved and repressed, then they will not go away without recognition. Only once there is dignity and respect for death, and by extension, life, might these ghosts be able to rest in peace. Haunt happens in big, fancy art museums like the Louvre, but it's also relevant to museums more broadly. Ever since the foundation of nation-states, the exhibition space served as display windows for each country's accumulations of art, artifacts, plants, animals, minerals, and human remains during direct exploitation of colonial expansion. In the museum model, human and biotic remains sit side by side with seeds, rocks, and beloved sacred belongings. The inclusion of racialized cultures and people within museum collections, figured as endangered species, reveals how this category of non-human, typically attributed to trees, animals, sculptures, soil, landscapes, etc., has also been extended over people. Perhaps the logics that have led to ecological crises are what is most on display in these spaces, which use pedagogical tools to perpetuate ideas about nature, conquest, and territory. Since the turn of the 20th century, museums have been restructuring without entirely dismantling these foundational philosophies. Museums of man have taken ethnology collections from museum natural history collections, and the most offensive exhibits have been moved back into storage, and collectors have recently been gravitating towards less politicized but no less political objects like dinosaur bones and geological wonders. Today, in the wake of recommendations made by the 2018 SAR-Savoir report on the restitution of African cultural heritage, there have been several commitments from numerous countries towards provenance research and gestures of reparation initiated, largely centered around the more emblematic works of art. But even here, these practices of restitution fall along national lines and serve as diplomatic relations between countries rather than directly with groups of people most impacted. The most buzzworthy pieces are the ones that correspond to the national government, despite the objects often being taken from kingdoms, individuals, and groups of people divided by colonialism. Rather than recognize this harm, which has disturbed an entire fabric of relations, these publicity stunts serve more as symbolic actions and photo ops. These collected artifacts that do make their way home stand in for the many more that remain in storage units, still restless. History is loudest from those who claim to own its record. This is why the museums are reluctant to release their collections. The opening lines to 1953 French essay film, The Statue Now aussi, or Statues Always Also Die, aptly describe the way museums produce culture through history and art. Quote, when men die, they become history. Once statues die, they become art. This botany of death is what we call culture, end quote. So in material culture or biopolitics, here this botany of death, through art and history, is one of the many ways that empires maintain. The film, banned in French until the 60s, is more broadly a 30-minute meditation on how colonialism framed African art and artifacts as a commodity fetish in Western civilization, and ultimately lands on an argument that African and European art are part of one shared human culture. But here's where I might revise their argument. The notion of a singular humanity eclipses difference in favor of an imagined, though exclusive, universality. Museum protocols of dispossession impacts the conditions that we all share as a living, but humanity as a whole does not have a shared orientation towards death. While we interrogate the origins of the museum, it's also important to account for the possibility of its death and dignified rest for those held captive in the interim. A tall Abyssinian giraffe watches over visitors in the Emile Cartillac Mediathèque at Toulouse's Museum of Natural History. This impressively stoic animal died from unreported causes in 1844, only a year after being brought to the south of France. And local families in Toulouse made a feast of her body during that winter's Epiphany celebration. The city acquired her remains for a zoologist to conduct a 20-day dissection, completing the first ever anatomical profile of a giraffe, which was a technological feat of its time. After her remains had been rummaged, searched, surveyed, notable taxidermist of the 19th century, Henri Travers took control over her skin and reassembled the large animal for display in the museum when it first opened in 1865. But display is not commensurate with care. Despite her upright posture, when we gaze at either the giraffe, we understand that they are no longer flesh and bones, but a museum fantasy of the recreation of a life that was lost in the wintry, inhospitable climate for a giraffe. In this form of museum, scientific, ethnological, or art, where natural laws of life are suspended and frozen for examination, the natural course of things is obstructed. Held up with pedestals, podiums, and pins, specimens, art, and artifacts breathe shallow breaths, perhaps halfway restituted, almost revived, but certainly revised. In the years after her dissection, Toulouse's Museum of Natural History, the second largest in France, would go on to expand its collection to display roughly 5,000 specimens and objects, and tuck away over 2.5 million specimens and objects in the reserves, many of which, in the frenzy of colonial collecting, are missing identification or provenance information, and instead are tucked away in drawers to be inventoried in some abstract future. The giraffe's remaining body parts were disturbed again in the 20th century, this time propped up with a wooden frame, cork lining, refreshed morphological details, and reprocessed skin. But when the museum experienced a lack of public interest at the end of the century, the museum required restoration itself. When the ceilings began to cave around the millennium, the museum closed for 10 years for renovations. While France repoliticked its stance towards its collections and reinvested interest in an aesthetic nostalgia for natural history museums and cabinets of curiosities. Meanwhile, too fragile to be displaced again, the giraffe remained in place, standing in a wooden box, untouched, as the museum's walls and identity modernized around it, rebranding colonial collections as global heritage. Also in 2000, 18 art museums across Europe and North America, including the Louvre, signed the Declaration on the Importance and Value of Universal Museums. This document declared universal heritage over metropolitan museum collections, stating that museums did not just serve the citizens of their own nations, but all of humanity. This shift in museums thinking about themselves as pedagogical and for the public reinvigorated a disciplinary and authoritative power of memory and history through hoarding what is global history or world cultures. By this argument, these institutions justified the right to maintain increasingly contested biotic remains and arts and artifacts. I include natural history in this discussion of art museums because the divide between art museums and natural history museums is only a really recent disciplinary distinction, despite many shared organizing principles. To return to the birth of the museum, Tony Bennett writes, quote, "For the emergence of the art museum was closely related to that of a wider range of institutions. History and natural science museums, dioramas and panoramas, national and later international exhibitions, arcades and department stores, which served as linked sites for the development and circulation of new disciplines, history, biology, art history, anthropology, and their discursive formations, the past, evolution, aesthetics, man, as well as for the development of new technologies of vision." It is through these new disciplinary divides between persons, non-beings, art, sculpture, artifact, that public items are even more alienated from relation. The display no longer have context, and the viewer is primed to interact in a removed, observatory way. In other words, the trappings of the museum prohibit communion. Without communion or gathering, the space is stripped of the sacred. Instead, the museum offers a controlled set of relations, usually guiding interactions towards a nationalist narrative of progress or a singular universal truth. The unwilling actors recruited for this plot are ancestors, plants, land, art, and artifacts, often from faraway places. This manipulation of life after death obscures and removes the complex web of relations in which we all live, which is the same thing as saying the gaze in which we die. The technology of the museum relies on visual observing, as opposed to more social forms of witnessing and participation. Fred Moten, in conversation with Hanif Abu-Rakib on millennials are killing capitalism, discusses the limits of what a white audience is conditioned to hold, where complexities are reduced and made more palatable, and simultaneously, the way that existing in those spaces is like, Moten quotes the artist Arthur Jaffa here, experiencing, quote, the white gaze as a rain of bullets, end quote. The gaze itself is a technology used to maintain the depth of that which is being observed. Any institution with this form of alienated relationship to life will certainly have a fraught relationship to death. A major shift in the 18th century was the understanding that species could go extinct. Before that, this was a controversial idea, and there was an adamant belief that life would always return. Even then, simultaneous to 19th century theories of evolution were beliefs that naturalized annihilation of non-European people as an inevitable or natural process. But among the mass violence and atrocities committed by Europeans, such as the Great Dying, as Amitabh Ghosh has in the Nutmeg's Curse, quote, what did they learn from observing those catastrophes, end quote. Apocalyptic times have already been witnessed by many of the founding members of early museum institutions. What did they learn about annihilation? Being at the hand of annihilation is very different from respect for life. These ethics echo in collecting and display practices which continue to be held in custody for an indeterminable future. But just as history makes the past flexible, the future isn't set in stone either. Many people across the world have cultures that far outdate the creation of these museums. In an interview with the Funambulist, activist and legal scholar Edward Hallelujah Ayua talks about the repatriation of Hawaiian ancestors and how the hoarding of human remains and ancestral withholding is one of the most visceral examples of the necropolitics of colonialism in museum collections. But he also offers another insight, which is scale. Quote, in all the cases I've been involved with, I tell them, the question here is not whether they are coming home, it's when, end quote. While museums are trapped in funding cycles in which they must repeatedly justify their existence and relevance to themselves, their patrons, and their donors, there's a much longer timeline to be accountable to. And thinking long-term also means planning around death. What about a museum that knows it has a lifespan, and rather than outlasting its mandate, creates a plan for its dissolution? As the New York Museum of Natural History removes the Teddy Roosevelt statue, the Humboldt Forum finds money towards dialogue, and the Parthenon marbles, known for a while as the Elgin marbles, may eventually return to Athens. The set changes without significant shifts to the scaffolding, just like the Museum of Toulouse. More than 150 years after her death, the giraffe still stands, perpetually preserved in a pedagogical purpose, as a sideshow to Twiga, the younger and more recently taxidermized giraffe from South Africa, that's now displayed in the lobby next to the gift shop. There's nothing natural about history that does not decay and decompose. There's nothing alive about museum culture that there's no acknowledgement that life cycle also includes the right to dignified death. Because, as many secret teachings relay, life and death are two sides of the same coin. In Octavia E. Butler's Parable series, the protagonist writes in Book of the Living, verse 36, "We give our dead to the orchards and the groves. We give our dead to life. Death is a great change, is life's greatest change. We honor our beloved dead. As we mix their essence with the earth, we remember them, and within us, they live." What would it mean if we took museums to the orchards to honor our beloved dead? What might we remember? How might the leaves offer more possibilities for life? Might it even be possible for it to happen ceremoniously? Could there be a reclamation by bugs to return to soil? Perhaps with the support of microorganisms, it could even fertilize the future. If new citizenships are produced by cultural knowledge, then how might an ethic of the right to rest in peace produce new forms of relating? Until then, museum commitment to the permanence of its collections without recognition of lifespan and return to home soil is fundamentally a stance against life. A refusal of the right to rest in peace. As witnesses, how might we engage with these spaces? And finally, listen to these ghosts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chanelle. Chanelle's going to be live, and we're now going to move to Tatjana. We're running really late, so you keep it quite quick, in 15 minutes. Disentangle Nature, Fossil Fuel Progress in the Cell is next by the wonderful Tatjana Soding. Tatjana is a research member of the Zeppelin Collective, a group of scholars, activists, and students working on the political ecology of the far right. Currently, her work investigates the political ecology of the alternative with Deutschland. She holds an MSc in human ecology from Lund University. Welcome, Tatjana. If you look at what's going on for a while now, you might think that this is a little bit of timeline, and I think you're right. And it's actually the outcome of an amazing and very inspiring process of co-creation with the main characters that I was working with today. And in our workshop, a lot of questions such as who's the lead talking about, stories, and stories. Is a timeline not in itself a Western-centric idea of where we understand time is linear, time is just progressive in a line, and from whose positionalities are we actually speaking? So the timeline ended up being more of a chaotic resemblance of all of these thoughts, and I'm actually really happy about this, because it does explain both the importance of telling stories, but also the need to tell them together. None of us can tell them by themselves, and we need to come together to think through the past, how we shape our present moment, and how we can disconnect from ourselves with various forms of passion to shape that future. And to finish off this quick introduction to the project, I would like to invite you throughout the day to get to speak to other people about how you yourself work with fossil fuels and how you can break that pollution in a regenerative way. That's not guided by ignorance, by not guided in the way that we're really seeing it instead. And maybe after some of these discussions, you want to grab some fabric, keep whatever you want, and this will have a result. So apparently there's a little bit of difficulty with the live stream audio. Bear with us if you can hear me. We're figuring it out, and hopefully it will be fixed very soon. Next, I'm really excited to be able to show you this film. It's a short film called Genocide of the Yanomami People of Actual and Alinu. I'm looking at Alinu. Thank you, Louisa. This commission came about through Louisa Prado and her connection to someone called Amazone Arawak, who is an artist and activist. This short film is about historical and ongoing violence in the north of Brazil. I annoyingly have not got the right here to be out his biography, but I will at the end of the play the film.
Iequana, eu sou do povo Iequana, atual presidente da Associação Nacional Iequana, Bom, eu vou falar aqui respeito à nossa terra de Yanomami, que foi demarcada no 5 de maio de 1992. Aquilo seria fim da luta dos povos indígenas, mas continuou no razão até acontecer o massacre do Rachimon, onde os parentes Yanomamis morreram pelo Garibeiro. A partir daí, continua a invasão da terra de Yanomami. Agora, esse ano, completa 30 anos de terra de Yanomami. Completou foi 25 de maio. Mas continua a mesma situação. A invasão garimpeira trouxe mais invasores, como facção criminosa nos rios, onde há muito garimpo, onde há muita destruição. O garimpo está destruindo nossos recursos naturais, poluindo nossos rios, matando os peixes, o nosso fonte de alimentação, espantando a nossa caça. As caças ficando mais longe, fica difícil para a nossa população, para as comunidades, para as crianças. Então, aumentou muito malária. O garimpo é crime. Os garimpeiros são criminosos. Estão destruindo nossos recursos naturais. Estão destruindo a floresta. Isso é crime. A violência está cada vez maior. Abuso sexual das meninas, das mulheres, dos povos de Amã e Iguana, aliciamento de jovens. Isso é muito preocupante para os povos de Amã. Estamos aqui para falar a realidade da nossa terra, como nós vivemos hoje em dia, diante desse governo brasileiro. Sempre viemos fazer as denúncias ao governo federal. Sabemos que o governo ele tem papel para proteger as terras indígenas demarcadas. A Associação Anateruna hoje bem forte para denunciar o garimpo. As demais associações também estão lutando para isso. Somos contra garimpo ilegal, contra a mineração. Somos legítimos da floresta. Queremos nossa terra livre dos invasores. Queremos viver em paz. Se o governo quiser apoiar os povos indígenas, queremos projetos de desenvolvimento sustentável, queremos projetos que apoiam educação, saúde dos povos indígenas de Amã e Iguana. Não queremos destruição. Isso é ruim para a gente. Isso é nosso sonho, isso nós queremos fazer hoje, destruição invasores. O PL, que governo, do nosso governo do Estado, sempre sanciona, apoiando os invasores, em vez de apoiar as populações indígenas. Isso é ruim para a gente. O governo federal deveria apoiar os povos para retirar os invasores. É isso que nós queremos hoje, porque as crianças estão mais doentes. As crianças tomando banho, água contaminada, os rios barrentos. As crianças estão ficando cada vez mais vulneráveis. Por isso estamos preocupados com a nossa terra de Mianmar.
Olá, eu sou Pablo Reis, historiador, jornalista, comunicador popular, a rede de. Quando nós falamos no genocídio e ecocídio, que hoje existe dentro da terra indígena no nome, nós precisamos compreender que esse é um ato do Estado brasileiro. Durante a ditadura militar, em 1974, o Estado brasileiro criou o Polo Rurais, transformando a região da terra indígena no nome num grande polo minerário para o Brasil. Desde esse período, nós temos as constantes invasões dentro desse território, com amplo apoio do Estado brasileiro. Vejamos os níveis. Os níveis são federais e já vezes navegam à vontade de eles, sem bater nenhuma política federal. As pistas clandestinas de onde decolam helicópteros e aeronaves não são fiscalizadas pelo Ministério Federal. O Estado brasileiro instrumentalizou ajudou o genocídio dos povos indígenas e Yanomami, principalmente nesse período, aonde os investimentos de fiscalização e as ações de combate ao garimpo ilegal são minguadas pela falta de recursos públicos e pelo teto de gastos que impede que o governo federal possa investir na proteção dos povos Yanomami, como determina a Constituição Federal do Brasil. É importantíssimo que a sociedade brasileira, os povos de cada lugar do mundo, se alinhem aos povos Yanomami para combater o genocídio e o genocídio que ocorre hoje dentro da terra indígena. E em certeza, a lei e o projeto da lei apontaram as áreas de iluminação e territorialismo. É a partir da perspectiva dos governos militares de 30 anos, alinhado com as empresas privadas, a entrada de primeira lei e a inclusão territorialismo. Dessa forma, e a universidade até terra de Yanomami, inclusive a instituição orquestrada dentro do território Yanomami pela Constituição. Nesse período, a batalhadora de e a legislação ambiental, que criminalizou a mineração e a lei do território indígena. Isso é de 1990, quando está assumido lá no Rio, eles criminalizam a área de cidade pública. E nesse período, nós tivemos uma parte de Rio, aquela parte que os brasileiros começaram o governo da União e constituiu o primeiro caso de genocídio no Brasil, de Galo. E mais recente, ele está trabalhando também com criminalidade de empresários e políticos, organizando também para que esses territórios tivessem presentes nesses territórios, mais de 40 milhões de territórios na União, também empresários, levando dinheiro, economia, muitos de constituindo também e aí a ataque e racionamento. A diferença que eu tenho para hoje é que eu analisar o legal. A outra questão que eu tenho está dentro do território indígena. Então, a gente tem empresários, políticos, tem próprios governadores apontando para que façam mineração e dar impacto legal no território indígena. Então, não é possível que a gente aceite essa situação como essa. Nós estamos muito povos indígenas lutando para que os recursos da empresa, nesse momento, para que eles possam continuar com essa produção cultural dentro do seu território. Então, por isso que a gente tem essa solução. Para lembrar toda essa memória de violência da população indígena do país da Bahia.
Meu nome é Priscila Cardoso Rodrigues, eu sou advogada, professora da Universidade Federal de Roraima e curadora de arte indígena. A tragédia Yanomami que vem sendo causada pelo garimpo ilegal, ela não é de hoje. Há décadas, há mais de 50 anos, que vem ocorrendo uma sucessão de tragédias causadas justamente pelo avanço do garimpo ilegal sobre as terras indígenas. Tudo começou lá nos anos 70, com a construção da Perimetral Norte, que abriu acesso para a terra indígena Yanomami e com ela trouxe, além das doenças, do desmatamento, trouxe também mais de 40 mil garimpeiros para dentro da terra indígena Yanomami. Em 1987, houve uma corrida do ouro para dentro da terra indígena Yanomami. E no meio desse caos de doença, de violência, de estupro de mulheres e meninas indígenas, o então presidente da FUNAI, Romero Jucá, resolveu proibir a entrada de todos os profissionais de saúde, pesquisadores, missionários e também dos pesquisadores, dos apoiadores dos povos indígenas Yanomami e Etuana, causando uma das maiores tragédias que nós vimos na atualidade em relação aos povos indígenas. Em 1992, houve a grande conquista dos povos indígenas Yanomami e Etuana, que foi justamente a demarcação da terra indígena Yanomami. E quando a gente pensou que dali para frente, havia esperança de que realmente os povos indígenas poderiam desenvolver o seu bem viver, viver de acordo com as suas formas próprias e a sua cultura. Em 1993 veio o grande massacre de Rachel. A partir de então, outras tragédias aconteceram, mas desde 2018, com o avanço desse governo ultraconservador, a gente tem visto uma nova corrida do ouro para dentro da terra indígena e animal. A nossa exposição Genocídio Indígena, Genocídio Yanomami, de Rachel Amarillo, é justamente uma forma de denunciar que essa tragédia que vem ocorrendo, na verdade, ela faz parte de um processo histórico que se iniciou há 50 anos atrás. E também é uma forma de luta, para a gente mostrar que a terra indígena Yanomami pede socorro, que os povos indígenas, Iepuana e Yanomami, pedem socorro, e que eles vão resistir e lutar por sua terra, por sua cultura e por suas vidas. E que eles não estão sozinhos. Nós vamos estar juntos com os povos indígenas Iepuana e Yanomami para levar a voz e a luta desses povos para todo o Brasil e para todo o mundo através dessa exposição.
So thank you so much, Anna and all the presenters for that message. Particularly after the recent election in Brazil, I want to say that our solidarity is with you and also to all of our Brazilian contributors. I'm just going to read down Zoning's bio out and we can have a quick Q&A, so you can please sit down and soon. Amazoni Arawak is the son of Wakishana and Makichi in indigenous schools. He is an artist, craftsman, indigenous artist, cultural producer, and marketer. He has lived in several indigenous communities in the Brazilian state of Roraima and in the Amazon. He is a social scientist, an anthropologist, a researcher of the Arawak and Arab indigenous peoples in the triple border of Brazil, Venezuela, Guyana. And he has a master's degree in research and anthropology. Okay, so Tatjana, I'm going to take a seat. Can you hear us? Can you see us? Hello. Thank you so much, Chanelle. Thank you so much, Tatjana. And thank you so much, Anna. I think maybe it would be really great to start with you to tell us a little bit about your current research practice and how it links to current justice issues. I'm going to start with Chanelle, who's currently in Madagascar. Hello. I think we need to
I'm not trying to say that all that he has to decide which lab where the level is being who gets the access to the is it factories that use country groups or is it factories that are somewhere else? Or is it the lab using here and and then we need to also understand how we're entangled in some of the techniques and then support them.
Thank you. Do you have another question? Okay, good. And also in terms of community energy, we have Ellie Harrison talking later, who's a different expert on this. So we can take that conversation. Questions? More than the last couple. Any more questions? Okay, so I'd like to just finish on one question. I'll start with you. I've been in conversation with both for the last year, and something that's really struck me in this dialogue and also in both your presentations is that taking back ownership over these relations in history, over these stories and our life communities, involves a laborious process of unlearning. Unlearning is needed to break down the stories we've grown up with about world cultures and to preserve knowledge and practices in a certain way. And it's this unlearning that shows us that there's currently a dominant story of culture and nature that we need to over others. And I feel in a different approach that I'm just constantly unlearning and constantly failing in this project. So I wonder if you could say, Chanelle, first, and a bit about unlearning.
the user what we consider the stream model in media philosophy, where the nation is always in that concept, where we think about states and territories, where we think about the primacy of the economy, where we think about nature, territory, and making the distinction between local nature and the right side is looking at the extreme, but also the drive for those progress, for example. That's not the best really user economics and culture nowadays. So I think I'm learning to really open up a move towards the left in that sense, and really making sure that we can see how we roll out some other things and how we take it to extremes by various factions. But now also deep dive into some of that sometimes and maybe do something often. It's really deep dive that if you, for example, go around it so I think I'm learning to really trying to colonize around that other processes and structures and then move forward other things. Thank you, and I'm going to try to put this on time, so I want to say thank you so much to Tatjana, Soding, and Chanelle. We'll be coming back in 15 minutes for our next session that's generated this way, called Disturbing. Thank you, redistribution and replacements. I will be thinking a lot about design and actions and the things we have to give up, so thank you so much.
Okay, Bobby. Hello, we're testing. I don't know if I should, but I need to check, so I can't. I'm not gonna. We need to. What do we?
That's always check it with this. Attach to the computer, and then. Yeah. Can you hear me? I think so. Because it's see the frequency. I think connect to this. Yeah. Now. Can you get it? Yeah. It's going from here, right? If you select the input like zoom, if the input is zoom, then it's going to be fine. Try doing built-in microphone. Are you still getting sound over here? Check. Did you try? See? We have to check on the live stream. Is it still on?
Can you stand here and talk, and I'll check the live stream.
Hello. Hi.
Yeah, I can hear you.
So should we try it on with the boom?
Maybe. If this doesn't work, try with it. Because with this it's going to be easy. We can put the output over there. And then someone can just sit with the sound. Someone can sit near to the speaker. So we don't need to do that. Maybe if
But the thing is, we're
and the bus sound, I think it's from the charger.
yeah.
Because it's charging, so it
Yeah.
makes that sound. That's why it's going to be
Yeah.
Cool?
Sound good. Okay.
Sound good?
Stream and stream.